Hey guys, as promised, here is the last two video demonstrations I want to show you guys. The first one is dry brush. Dry brush is a little bit tricky because you typically want to use a flat brush, and I don't have a flat brush, but other things you can do is you can use a regular pointed brush. This is kind of an older one, and I just kind of like squeezed down on the bristles to kind of splay it out a little bit. You also don't want your paper to be wet, and you also don't want your brush to be very wet, but you almost want to kind of play around with the wetness of your brush. And another thing is, typically when you do dry brush with a round brush, you don't actually paint it with the tip, you actually paint it with the side. Dry brush is kind of tricky. So I want to also give you another option to use a fan brush. And fan brushes are kind of cool and can give you some different texture effects, and that can be an option that you can kind of experiment around with as well. All right. So dry brush. I've mixed up some brown and some green, and I'm going to kind of show you. So my brush is maybe just damp. It's not very wet at all. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to tap the side of it into a little bit of this paint, but not a lot, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag this across the surface. And you can see I'm not getting very much paint. So that's not enough, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap in a little bit more. And there we go. I'm getting some kind of cool by using the edge of my brush. Things like this are good for like grasses, for texture, different things like that. So I'm just lightly running my brush across the top of the surface. Also, if this watercolor was a little bit better quality and had a little bit more raised tooth to it, it would also make dry brush a little bit easier. But that's kind of the hang of it with kind of a ratty old brush like this, kind of flattened out and then painted with the side of it. You could also, if you wanted to, with a flat brush, and if I flatten this out, I can kind of pretend like this is a flat brush. Typically we don't want to do this to a pointed tip brush, and I wouldn't suggest maybe doing it with the good brushes we're using, but you could experiment with, and this is going to probably be similar to the effect of the fan brush. See, now that's too much water, so I might brush that off. That's a little too much water. Okay. But again, this is all kind of experimenting around. Now that's a little bit better. That's a little bit less. I'm getting that dry brush effect. Okay. So fan brush. Fan brushes are kind of cool. Maybe in this shape right here, I'll kind of show you. So fan brush, I'm going to kind of dip the tip of it, and you can see it's sucking up the paint into the, and then again, you can, as I draw it up, and it can give you some really cool like grass effects. You can also try, instead of, you can turn it on its side and go up like that, and that's kind of cool too. And that's a really nice sort of grassy dry brush effect with turning the fan brush on its side. Okay, so that is dry brush. All right guys, so I'm going to demonstrate splatter for you, and what I would recommend is kind of covering up your other shapes with a paper towel or a piece of paper to prevent, because splatter can kind of go everywhere. And what you want to do is you want to have quite a bit of nice runny watery paint, and you want your brush to be nice and loaded with the paint, and then I'm just tapping on the top of the brush, and it's creating these nice little kind of splatters. This was a drip that I kind of had been experimenting earlier with. And again, you can rinse. I'm going to take up some of this yellow. But it can give you some kind of cool effects. You grab some of this blue. But it's just having a nice, really juicy wet brush, and then really load it up and then just tap on it where you want it. I'm gonna rinse that, and then maybe do a little bit of this dark or this lighter green. But it's just kind of fun. And again, it can be useful for various things that you want to do. Okay, so there's splatter. All right, guys, the last technique is the, I want to show you is the drip. You really want to make sure your brush is extra wet, and you want to make sure your paper's dry, but where you start painting, you want to make sure it is really, really wet. So I'm going to start with like this kind of blue color. I'm just going to kind of paint it at the top here, kind of in a puddle. And then I'm just going to tilt the paper, and then we're going to watch. Make sure you guys can see this. Oops, you can't see it. We're going to let gravity do its thing. There we go. It's holding on. Turn it so you guys can see it. There we go. That one's not letting go. Come on. But the weight of the water will drip down, and you can experiment around using different colors over top. Like maybe you want to try you can see how that color is following the wetness of that other color, which is kind of cool, and then kind of doing its own thing going down. And then there goes my drip. There it goes. It's getting into my gradient wash there. But you can just have kind of some fun playing around with having the paint kind of work its way down your. Sometimes it gets a little bit stuck, so I'm kind of tapping on it, adding a little more water. we go. There we go. Okay. So you can combine drips with splatter. I did that over here, and you can kind of play around with different ways to get the paint to drip. You could, like I did over here, I painted stripes and then kind of had the paint drip down. Here I just was playing around with the drips in general. But you again, you can kind of experiment, but just you need to know that lots of water and lots of pigment. And you can do drips on top of drips, next to drips, and kind of see what kind of effects you can get. I'm gonna add a little more. Here we go. Okay, that is drips.